Good morning, everyone.
Is the microphone on?
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? I don't know. Everybody?
I don't think the microphone's working real well.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. We're going to try and work on this. Hello. Good morning, everybody. My name is Bill Peacock. I'm the director for the Center of Economic Freedom at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and we're so glad that you could be here for our 10th annual policy orientation and our panel today on making Texas a high-tech titan. Texas, it's really an amazing story that we've seen over the last decade or so here in Texas. Texas is by far and away the leader in job creation and economic growth. Over the last 10 years, for instance, Texas has created about 1.2 million new jobs, or let me put it a different way. Today, Texas has 1.2 million more jobs than they did a decade ago, whereas the rest of the country has 700,000 jobs less. They've lost 700,000 jobs during that period. Those kind of things don't happen by accident, and it's amazing what Texas has done to make us the leader in economic growth across the state. Across the country, you can look at that from a perspective of cities as well. A recent study looking at what cities have the best job growth in them ranked Austin number 1, Houston number 2, San Antonio number 3, and Dallas number 5th among the 65 largest cities in the United States. Again, just an amazing record. However, when we come to the area of high tech, the picture is not quite the same. We haven't fared so well in these state-to-state comparisons and city-to-city comparisons. Indeed, if you look at Austin, for instance, which, as I said, was the number 1 in overall job growth here in Texas, and at one point in time was even thought as maybe the next candidate to take over the lead from Silicon Valley, Austin only ranks 32nd when it comes to job growth in the high-tech sector and has lost over 19% of its high-tech jobs over the last decade, including more than 17,000 jobs in the semiconductor, computer, and circuit board manufacturing industries. Houston, number 2 overall in job growth, is better than Austin, but still only ranks 18 when it comes to high-tech job growth, having lost 6% of its tech jobs in the last decade. And then finally, Dallas is way down in the high-tech sector at 46 when it comes to job growth, and they've lost seen their losses in areas of telecommunication carriers and in manufacturing of communications equipments and electronics. It's particularly notable that Texas has this low growth rate when over the last few years technology has outpaced the rest of the economy when it comes to growth. So the question is, why is Texas doing so well when it comes to overall growth and not so well when it comes to job growth and economic growth in the high-tech area? Well, I don't have the answers for you today, but we have an expert panel over here of a lot of people who are very knowledgeable in this area who will give us some answers to those questions today. Our first panelist today is Representative Aaron Pena. Chairman Pena was first elected to the Texas House of Representatives in 2002, and he's the chairman of the House Committee on Technology. He also serves on the House Committee on Homeland Security and Public Safety and the House Committee on Redistricting. He represents House District 40 in serving the communities of Edinburgh, McAllen, the Delta area, and northern and western Hidalgo County. He's also a board-certified labor and employment lawyer. Please join me in welcoming Representative Aaron Pena.
Thanks, Bill. Can I close this?
Yes.
Okay. Well, it's good to be here. I always wonder why I'm here because most of the answers come out of the private sector when it comes to technology, and we simply implement policy that'll help you all grow. So I'm glad that Dane and Jeffrey are here to talk some real substance. As the chairman of technology, I think I was picked to do this job because I was the only guy over 40 who knew how to turn on a computer and Twitter. I see some of my Twitter friends out in the audience say, hello, everybody. Okay, that's a good plug right there. The committee has oversight of matters pertaining to advances in science and technology, including telecommunications, electronic technology, and automated data processing the promotion of scientific research, technological development, and technology transfer in the state, matters relating to cooperation of state and local governments with scientific and technological communities, including industry institutions of higher education and federal government laboratories, and the Emerging Technology Fund, which is a discussion unto itself. The committee was charged to study 5 interim charges relating to technology industry in Texas and to make recommendations to significantly improve the state's manufacturing capability and to find ways to increase transparency, accountability, and efficiency in government. A couple of interesting tidbits regarding technology. According to Tech America 2011 industry report, Texas ranks second, as you heard, amongst the nation in tech employment with 456,500 high-tech job workers in 2010. In 2010, Texas lost about 12,000 jobs, and that is a concern to us, and a question as to why. One of the interim charges that we have is to look into how we expand that. And so for those of you who are in the lobby or are working for private industry, we'll be having some hearings in the coming days, and we'll be looking to the testimony in that regard. If there is anything that you would like to testify on, I'd ask you to meet with my clerk here, Mari De Leon, and raise your hand again, Mari. And we will, okay, everybody's going to run to you, Mari. We will begin that discussion. High-tech firms in Texas employed 55 out of every 1,000 private sector workers in 2010, and we ranked 16th nationwide. High-tech workers earned an average wage of $84,000, or 84% more than the Texas average, and so that's important. The more private jobs we get to our communities, the better jobs that we can get. We all have heard during the presidential debate, as Texas is talked about, the response that we get from some of the other states is, well, look, those jobs are not high-paying jobs. Well, this is the area where we get high-paying jobs. But what that's going to mean is that we, as at least this is my personal perspective, we're going to have to invest in education and continue being an engine for this sort of industry, and that being technology. Texas ranks ahead of New York and behind only California, and certainly we could do better in California. Reports also suggest that Texas gained 1,900 jobs in computer systems designs and related services and gained 300 engineering service jobs in 2010. Job loss is on par with the rest of the country, so this probably indicates a national trend as opposed to a state trend. So what we're probably having is global challenges, and this is a question that you all could probably flesh out. Is our challenge a global one and not necessarily one from the states? Texas needs to attract new business within the industry and find a solution to attracting new businesses through continuing the Texas Emerging Technology Fund. The Emerging Technology Fund awards grants to companies researching new technologies and has a proven track record in Texas. Of course, that's a subject to debate, and there are detractors, and so that's a continuing debate that we'll have and something we'll be discussing in committee during the interim process. We recognize that we need to establish public-private partnerships to increase incentives for technology companies willing to come to Texas. Well, that's a basic overview of the situation, and as I said before, in our committee, I represent a group of members, I chair a group of members who simply want to make Texas better. And the question is going to be, the one that I'll be listening for is what sort of tax policy are we looking forward to or not looking forward to? I know that we've had debates over tax policy with regards to technology, and that'll be a continuing discussion. As I said, we have several interim charges that are available for discussion that touch on a broad subject matter area. And quite frankly, if there is something that we missed or that we're not discussing, please bring it to my attention, and we'll be glad to be looking at that. Some of our other members are interested in this subject matter because it really is about the future. I see Larry Gonzalez in the audience, and I know he's asked to participate in the process. And in your district, I know Dell is there, and it's a big issue for you. And so we invite you and the other members of the legislature to participate as we continue to find ways of bettering our state and our communities. With that, I'm going to pass it on to the real experts here today, Dane and Jeffrey. And let me also suggest that if you have specific ideas, that you provide those to us, and we'll follow up with it. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Before I get Dane Parker up here, let me get the computer up and running so we can get his PowerPoint on here. Our next panelist today is Dane Parker. Mr. Parker is currently serving as the Vice President of Global Facilities for Dell. In this role, he is responsible for all aspects of Dell's global footprint, including real estate, site selection, and development, operations, sustainability, and environment, health, and safety as well. He has been a key driver of Dell's conservation and green energy strategies. Prior to serving with Dell, Mr. Parker held various leadership positions at Intel Corporation, including GM and Director of Global Environment and Health and Safety, as well as site operations management roles in Arizona and Costa Rica. Please join me in welcoming Dane Parker.
All right. I first want to say I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I will tell you, I'm a unique individual in that I'm a conservative environmentalist, if you've ever heard of such a thing. It goes a long ways back, but we'll get into that maybe some other time outside this venue. You've got some fantastic debates I've noticed happening today. This panel may be somewhat unique, and I think you're going to see that we generally agree with one another. And Chairman Pena has done a fantastic job, I think, of kind of outlining some of the things that I did want to talk about. And obviously we have a lot at stake here as a company. I'll talk a bit about things going on within Dell. We're part of those employment figures you see. We have just around 18,000 employees in Texas in total, including about 3,000 in the Dallas area. Many of us, myself included, would say we got here as fast as we could. And love being here. And so that we have a lot vested in this state as well as in this country. And so I'll talk a bit about some of the things that I hope we can do to remain competitive going forward. So pushing the buttons, I think, correctly here. This is one of my favorite quotes, and although it's roughly 200 years old, I think this is particularly relevant in the times that we're in. And this is true of us as individuals, of course, and this is true of companies, and this is true of states and nations, is that it isn't just the strength that you've had in the past or your pure intelligence, it's how well you respond to change. And let me put forward that there's a big change afoot right now. And you might see this in some ways, as the chairman mentioned his capabilities on Twitter. If you think back about 10 years, the way people communicate has completely been revolutionized in the last 10 years. And you may take that for granted as maybe you watch it happening over time, but it's unbelievable the amount of change that's happening. And what I'd put forth, I've been in the technology industry for 20 years personally and have literally managed semiconductor manufacturing operations. I've built semiconductor wafer fabs all throughout the world and have seen sort of technology change. And so what high-tech means and what technology means is changing. And so let me tell you just a little bit about some statistics that show that, what that means for us, and then how it translates to policy and why policy matters. So these are big numbers with lots of dollar signs, but the point is the number of people who are using technology is growing exponentially. And these are IDC data here, but this talks about 3 billion people connecting by the year 2014 electronically via mobile or internet technology. Now, again, you might say, well, okay, that doesn't strike me as being unusual. That's an astounding number. That says that, by 2014, a very significant, approaching half of the world's population will be connected in some way to one another. That means information travels very rapidly. That means people know what happens in other parts of the world. And you've already seen from a civil and social and political perspective the power that communication brings. And the threat it is to some of those who lead countries, as well as the opportunity that can be for the citizens of those countries. At the same time, the amount of money being invested in this is enormous. And as you heard, generally high-tech jobs are well-paying jobs. And the amount of money companies and governments, public and private institutions are going to invest in spending, this is $73 billion on cloud-related services alone and by 2015. Now, cloud actually existed a couple of years ago, but most of you probably hadn't heard of it. You've probably heard of it today. What you may not realize is how much you're already using it. If you stream Netflix, if you have an account where your data is backed up online with one of the service providers, any of those things, you're using the cloud. That means the information that you use and manage is being optimally managed in some other location than your personal device. And that trend's growing very rapidly. That has privacy, lots of things, security come up with that kind of a trend. That's a big deal. And then just the raw amount of data that's being created. And so this is an IDC estimate that the digital universe, and that's defined as the total amount of data created, will double every 18 months. And again, that's an astounding statistic. Every 18 months, the amount of data created doubles. And so that the factoring effect of that creates enormous opportunities, enormous challenges. And so as a company, let me just tell you, and I promise this is the only slide I'll have that's a pitch for what we're doing. We are in the middle of literally a transformation. And so some of you probably knew Michael, knew the founding roots of our company that started not too far from here physically. And think of us as a hardware provider. And we want you to continue to think of us as a hardware provider, and that's a great thing. But more and more, we're not. We're really a solutions provider, because what you need isn't just a piece of hardware. You need a solution to a problem, a security problem, a data management and storage problem. Dealing with all this data and turning it into useful information is a tremendous challenge. And so there's an enormous opportunity for education, and specifically software developers, for example, to work on managing big data, on security and privacy around that data. Those are kinds of opportunities that are new and emerging and growing incredibly rapidly. And then, as a services and solutions provider, we want to provide those cloud capabilities that people will use. We want to be the computing that you don't see that happens in the background. And in the services and solutions, we're an IT outsourced provider. There are school districts in Texas today for whom we are doing their IT. And why is that? Well, because they're professional educators, and what they do best is educate employees. We're professional technologists, and what we do best is manage technology. That allows each of us to do the things that we do optimally and provide for the students then the best education that's possible. And I'll talk a bit about why that matters. So as a company, we are transforming. The jobs we create are different jobs than the jobs we used to create. And I'll share some data just from us with you as I talk about this. So this is my Economics 101. And you've heard maybe 201 or 301 or 401 this morning from those who have much more background than I do in this. But when I look at this simplistically, and I talk to my children and my friends about this is kind of my summary. Is I think healthy economies require jobs, and I would argue that they should be jobs created by the private sector, not by the public sector. And therefore, companies create jobs. So if you want to have a healthy economy, people need to be employed. And that means you need companies to create jobs for them. And so the simple solution for me is encourage companies to create jobs. I mean, it's really not that complex of a formula. Now, you heard mention of the loss of high-tech jobs in Texas and in Austin in particular. I will tell you that from our peak of almost 20,000 employees in, let's say, Central Texas, as a company, we're down to about 18,000 employees in Texas. Much of that is because of the change in our supply chain profile and the change as a company, the transformation that we're undergoing from someone who actually produces hardware themselves to someone who creates solutions. Now, that said, we've created over 1,000 new jobs in Central Texas in the last year alone. So we're actually hiring. In fact, we continue to hire here, and those jobs have been created in very high-end software development, engineering, product management, product development, those kinds of things. And so although parts of what you would call high-tech have shrunk, and from a supply chain perspective, there's a very powerful global dynamic at force that directs some of that. Many of the areas in which we operate that you would call technology and that I've talked about that are key to us as a solutions provider are growing, and are growing here. Much of our security business, our data protection and security business is going to be growing in our Plano office up near Dallas. And so that's an area that we feel great talent in that very particular niche field and a great opportunity for us. So although you look at the numbers and it paints a picture that may seem depressing in some ways, there's actually some bright lights as part of that. And let me talk about why and how I think you can influence some of these key enablers here. So the three things I wanted to call out, these are not by any means the only things, but these are three things. And as I look around the world at where we grow and how we grow, and it's a very fair conversation that the chairman mentioned about, who's the battle with? And there is a bit of, Texas versus New York or versus California, and absolutely that exists. And we would say Texas for us has been a very business-friendly place to operate, and there are both tax and other regulatory frameworks in place here that we find to be good for business and we like. The real battle is on a much bigger scale, and I'll talk about that in terms of federal tax reform, and I have a slide, I'll mention a few things on that, but it really is the biggest problem, the biggest barrier for us is federal tax reform, and specifically corporate tax. And you've apparently heard this morning, but outside of Japan, this is the most expensive country in the world from a corporate tax perspective in which to do business. In my simple theory, that says that's a problem. Because if you're telling a company that to have the privilege of operating in the United States and creating jobs, you have to be willing to have the second most expensive tax structure in the world, that's a hurdle, right? And it's not just the most by 1% or 2%, right? In many cases, it's double. Those are big numbers, and if you walk through the math, as I've done with some of my high schools, my kids who are in high school, about $1 that Dell earns, and ultimately who gets to spend that dollar? In the United States, most of that dollar gets to be spent by the government. That's who determines where that dollar gets spent. Now, we would prefer that our employees get to choose where to spend that dollar, and they make those choices, and then other businesses who our employees go to for goods and services get to make those choices. It's a big difference. Now, a second thing that's important to us in federal tax reform is territorial tax. You may have heard about this, it might have been brought up earlier, but the way tax is structured globally, it creates a very big disincentive to bring profits from other countries back to the United States. We tax those as if they'd been earned in the United States, as if they were earned by U.S. consumers or customers. They weren't, right? They were earned in other places. We'd like to bring them back here and invest them here, and we can't because they're taxed at our corporate income tax rate, so we lose 35% of everything we earn somewhere else and want to bring back here. That's a pretty significant barrier to having capital come back into the economy here and at a time when capital is an issue, right? There are many people who need access to capital to grow. We got lots of capital, and companies that are based here have capital. We just can't get it back without enormous penalties for that. So those are two of the key things for that. Education and public-private partnerships, let me touch on quickly too. So I want to give a quick tale of two cities. This is personal experience, just to give you some context for what the battlefield is on a global basis. And also, as I put in context, we created about 1,000 jobs last year in Central Texas, in fact, 2011. So, that drew some attention. A few people cared, but, by and large, people just thought, well, Dell's a big employer, and that's what they should do. They're here. And no one called me. No one thanked me. No one even asked if I was doing it. Okay. Conversely, I get about 5 calls a week. In fact, I met the Prime Minister of Latvia 2 months ago. Showed up and wanted to meet me because Latvia would like us to create some jobs in Latvia. They'd be happy if we created 50. We created 1,000 here. Nobody called. Okay. We're going into some cities in China. We're growing there. And this, let me tell you kind of what those cities have done. And I recognize it's a different political climate, and their ability to make decisions is different than ours. But in this city, they said, well, we'll give you a corporate income tax holiday for a defined period of time. You don't pay anything. Then for a next defined period of time, you pay half. And then after that, you go to the full rate, which is still far less than the rate you pay in the U.S. And then they gave us a building, and they said, you can have this building for 5 years, and we'll give you some money to fit out the inside of it so that your workers will be comfortable. And then they said, any employee that you hire here that comes here, we'll give them a personal income tax break. So we'll cut their personal income taxes by 50% if they come to work in our city. And then we've built some housing, and I went and saw it. Brand new apartments, look similar to maybe a college dorm, TVs, DVD players, washing machines on the balcony. And we'll give them this housing at an incredibly subsidized rate. So it works out to about $30 a month for a 1-bedroom and $50 for a 2-bedroom. And on a relative to what they would pay basis, that's probably about 40% or 30% of what they'd otherwise pay. So why are they doing that? They're doing that because they want jobs for citizens of their community. And what they realize is once those people have jobs, they start contributing. And they start consuming. And in fact, it can be fairly expensive to consume in China. It can be $10,000 to get your license plate for a car. Okay, that's pretty painful. But when you have a job and you save for that, that's something you're willing to want because you want to consume that. So from a global competitive perspective, this is what we're dealing with, right, is that for these cities, what they want, whether it's the Prime Minister of Latvia or whether it's a city in China, and by this small city, of 4 million people, they want jobs. Okay. And I think we need to start thinking that way in all aspects of what we do to have jobs stay. Education. So for the kind of workers we hire, and I've just talked about that are growing, kind of the knowledge workers, if you will, software engineers, people who know algorithms for security, and they need to know science, technology, engineering, and math, and they need to want a career in that, and not want it because there's no other choice or because whatever, but because it's really cool. And many of you have watched Mythbusters. Mythbusters is about science, technology, engineering, and math. Now they blow up a lot of things in the process, but that's what they do. We need to be able to be in a position where our students are excited to do this kind of work and do it because the way they're educated in is fun and creates that joy. And then the last thing I'll mention here is public-private collaboration. None of us can do this by ourselves, more so than ever, and Austin has some great examples of this. We need universities, we need public and private institutions and individuals to do things together so that ideas can become businesses which can create jobs, which can fund new ideas. And so things that stimulate, encourage, and reward public and private partnerships, we are very supportive of. So let me leave it with that. I appreciate the time signal. This is something I could talk about, obviously, for hours and hours. We'll have some time for questions and answers, and I'll be available after as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dane. Our final panelist today is Jeffrey Clarke. Jeff serves as the Executive Director of Tech America Texas and as the Southern Region Director of Tech America's State Government Affairs Program, where he manages the policy and advocacy efforts in Arkansas, Arizona, Colorado, Louisiana, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Texas, and Utah. Prior to coming to Tech America, Mr. Clarke was the American Electronics Association's Texas Council's Director of Public Affairs and Public and Legislative Affairs. Please join me in welcoming Jeff Clarke.
try not to fall off the stage. And I would point out Dell is one of our member companies at Tech America, and you will find some similarities between our messages, as Dane mentioned. And Bill, I just want to thank TPBF for raising this subject. It's easy to brag about Texas. It's one of the things we are known all over the world for, and most of the time it's true. We're a very big state, and I think we've hit some of the highlights, but just to kind of recap, CNBC says we're the best place to do business. Site Selection Magazine, Business Facilities Magazine say we're the best business climate in the country. We're the #1 exporting state. We have been for 8 years. And the high-tech industry has done well here as well. And Chairman mentioned from our Tech America Cyber States report, and I'm going to jump around a little bit from my prepared comments because some of this has been covered. But if you'd like a copy of that report, we publish it every year. I'd be happy to send you a PDF of that report if you'll email me. But it's called Cyber States. 5.5% of our workforce in Texas is found in the high-tech industry, and the wages are good, $84,000 a year on average, and which is higher than the average private sector wage, as the chairman mentioned, of about $46,000 a year. So if you're in the tech industry in Texas, you're doing quite well. And what we're also seeing in Texas is we're seeing talent move here from all over the country, in part because they see opportunities here, but also, and perhaps more importantly, because they are living in places where they know the opportunities don't exist and probably won't be coming back. A lot of folks are abandoning states that aren't doing a good job and heading here. The numbers in the aggregate are impressive, but as big as we are, it's sort of, I was trying to think of a good analogy, but it's sort of like me announcing that I can wrestle anyone in the room. I'm a pretty big guy. That's not, the fact that I can beat some of you in wrestling is not terribly impressive. When you're as big as we ought to be doing better than we are. And on a per capita basis, we're not really doing that great. We're 31st in research and development spending. We're 16th when it comes to tech workers. We're number 2 when you look at the aggregate number, but we're 16th on a per capita basis. We have a long way to go. The good news is we're doing a lot of things right, and we are improving. We have seen, I will kind of jump around, one of the things we have seen is as the semiconductor industry has faltered locally, we've seen a lot of that manufacturing move overseas, and so Austin has lost a lot of jobs. But we are ramping up in software, we're ramping up in cloud computing and security and other things. And what I see is my member companies telling me they cannot find the workforce they need in Austin. And they're in California trying to recruit folks to come here. We have had this discussion. I came to the Capitol as a staffer in 1992. In 1994, I was the staff for the interim committee on NAFTA and GATT. And we have, since long before that, we have been talking about the impacts of international trade on Texas and what it means for our economy. This is, at that time, globalization was becoming real. And here, as remarkable as it is to me, 20 years later, I'm still here talking about a very similar issue, but globalization is now a reality. Dane mentioned he gets contacted by companies or by countries. I routinely get calls from, this week it was Suzhou in China. They're coming. They want to visit Austin. They want to visit Dallas. They want me to help them out in Chicago. I kindly tell them my job is not necessarily to recruit companies to move to Suzhou. But the Chinese, and not just the Chinese, but governments all over the world recognize that the tech industry is where the answers are for their economic problems, and that the growth is going to be in the tech industry. And they're aggressive about it. We have to think that way. We have to be aggressive about it. We have to get companies to invest here and grow here. And Dane's absolutely right. When employees have jobs, they can pay the taxes, they can pay the sales taxes, they can pay those things that keep our government running if they have jobs. If they don't have jobs, they become a liability for the state. And we have to start thinking in terms of assets and liabilities. And I'll talk more about that in education. Every child in our state is either going to grow up to be an asset or a liability, and we control how that will pan out. Why do companies leave? This is, I think if we look at why companies are going to other places, it helps us understand how we get them to stay. First reason is low-cost labor, and there's very little we can do about that, although we have some inherent advantages by our proximity to Mexico. We have, Texas has benefited when we had low-cost manufacturing on the border, and as that returns, and some of it is returning, and ramping up again, there are advantages there. But that's one of the reasons companies look overseas is low-cost manufacturing. The second is the regulatory burdens, particularly environmental regulations, that are predictable. And Dane mentioned this. In China, they tell you exactly what the rules are going to be, and those rules generally apply for an extended period of time. I saw the CEO of GE recently on CNBC talking about China's 5-year plan. Now, China is a problematic country with major problems of its own and political problems of its own, so I don't want to sound like I'm holding up China as the model of how we should do things. But what he said is China has a 5-year plan. I take the 5-year plan, I give it to my managers. We know what the 5-year plan is. We know what the regulatory climate is going to be, and we know what the tax climate is going to be. And we're able to plan that way. In the United States, we have a tendency to change the rules constantly. So we spend a lot of our effort complying with new rules and simply figuring out what the rules are going to be. So companies look for stable and understandable regulatory environments. Excuse me. Third reason companies look overseas is access to markets. It's very difficult to, China is one of those countries. One of the reasons we have the policies that we do with China is because we want access to 1.3 billion consumers. And companies are moving there. When you realize, you look at a lot of the tech companies who are investing, in addition to their investments in the United States, and they are making them and they are growing here. They're also growing in China because there are consumers there, and we want access to those consumers. 1.3 billion people in Shanghai. I was in Shanghai in November. 23 million people, the entire state of Texas population in a city that's smaller than New York. I mean, imagine this, and half of the traffic's on bicycles. It's phenomenal. But there's a high concentration of people and economies that are emerging as consumers. And so there are real opportunities that exist there. And so companies are looking overseas for market opportunities. The other reason they're looking is incentives. And we mentioned that. We have to, and I'll hit this quickly, but we have to be thinking about incentives that we can provide to companies to come here, stay here, and grow here. And then the last reason companies look overseas, or one additional reason, is workforce, skilled workers. And Dane mentioned it. I see it locally. I see what I hear from my members locally is that they are stealing employees from each other. There are not enough software, there are not enough computer scientists, there are not enough engineers, not enough software developers. We don't have the workforce that we need. So there are companies, the misconception that many people have is that companies are leaving and going to low-wage places. I've talked to companies who have left and gone to Canada, which is not a low-wage environment, but major, national brand, household names who are going to Canada because the workforce is available in Canada. We've got to fix our workforce issues. So the question is, how do we, what do we have to do? And I'll throw out some quick solutions and let me know if I'm where I am on time. The first thing is we need to get the education we're already paying for. The problem is that we don't spend enough money on education. The problem is that we're not getting from our public schools what we need. There's an old joke that education's the one thing Americans are willing to pay for and not get. My generation had a little bit of an advantage because you could if you went to college, it really didn't matter what you studied because there was a job for you when you got out. Kids today, the pop culture is beginning to drive the message home. When you talk to younger kids, I routinely help a 12-year-old with her math homework, and they hear at school about the challenges that they face or will face from competition around the world. But we've got to push our children to excel in STEM fields. We're not only facing competition overseas, but we're also facing a major shortage in STEM-related fields because we have a huge generation of tech workers who came out of that initial, when the Soviets put Sputnik up, the United States was so nervous we invested massively in science and technology and math because we needed to compete with the Russians. And now that generation of workers is on the verge of retirement, so we not only have to compete with the competition overseas, but we have to backfill for the folks who are retiring. Some quick stats on STEM. Half of the economic growth over the last 50 years in the United States can be attributed to the STEM fields. In 2009, this is how bad we're doing. 2009, 34% of our eighth graders, only 34% of our eighth graders were proficient in math, which is not, you can't compete that way. Internationally, we rank 13th in science, we rank 17th in math, and looking forward, almost all of the top 30 occupations over the next 2 decades are going to be in STEM-related fields. So STEM is where the action is. We need to get our schools to focus on STEM. We have done that to some extent with our T-STEM academies. We need to increase those programs. We have, the state has made investments in robotics, which we appreciate. We need more. I've got a couple of challenges for you today. If you're not familiar with the local robotics program in your district, find it. We will help you find it, get involved with it, and go visit it. The robotics, particularly the FIRST robotics program, is getting kids involved in STEM and getting them interested, making science a sport so that they're engaged and they want to stay involved. We've got to get kids when they're younger. I heard at one of the FIRST robotics competitions, one of the dads took me aside, his son, I think his 12-year-old son. He said, I need to get my son interested in science and math before he discovers the 3 smells. I was like, what are the 3 smells? Yeah. I said, what are the 3 smells? He said, beer, girls, and cars. And I think, but it's absolutely right. You've got to get the hook in these kids while they're younger. Keep them engaged. It's kind of hard to get 16-year-old boys to refocus on STEM fields. But we've got to get them engaged at an early age and get them active. Quality teachers, we need to ramp up. We have a master math teacher program in the state of Texas. We need to fund that more fully. We need to have more teachers getting larger stipends, because those teachers are not only teaching students, but more importantly, they're mentoring other teachers and teaching them how to teach math. And we need to use technology better in the classroom. It's amazing. If you go, every aspect of your life, I'm checking Facebook here as people are posting pictures of me here, and I'm commenting on, asking, thank you, Kevin, asking what I should be saying. But it's, technology has revolutionized everything from the video broadcast to the social networking to the computing. But if you go into a classroom, the classroom you walk into, even in the best schools, the classroom looks the same as it did 100 years ago. And that's a problem. And the kids leave the classroom and they're immediately on their devices. But somehow we haven't been able to bridge that gap. We are doing better. The state has done a better job of encouraging that, but we need more funding. We need more flexibility for school districts to use technology and get the curriculum they need in a technical, in a technology-based format. And then lastly, and this is just a personal commentary, we need to create, this is my other challenge for you, go visit your local middle school, go visit your local high school, but don't visit the good one. Go visit the bad one. Because I am amazed when I go to some of the schools, even here in Austin, and this is a great city, a very advanced city, there are schools that I would not eat lunch. There is a school I refused to eat lunch by myself in the school. Some of the schools that we're running look more like prisons and institutions for incarcerating people than they look like academic settings. And we have given the school districts the tools they need to maintain order and create an environment where learning can occur, and we have to keep that. That's just a personal commentary. I would encourage you to go look at the schools, and because we've got to make we've got to create an opportunity or an environment where kids can learn. At the college level, and I'm short on time, we still have the best university system in the country, and Texas has stepped up recently in our Tier 1 efforts to increase the number of Tier 1 universities. That's a great thing. We've got to continue to push our universities on commercialization, because frankly, publishing research for the purpose of reading it is not where the economy is going to grow. We've got to get the innovations and the research out of the laboratory into the business, into the marketplace, and that will bring opportunities to Texas. And we've got to work on immigration reform at the federal level. I know we're not focused on federal issues today, but it makes no sense for us to give half of our advanced engineering and computer science degrees to foreign nationals and then tell them they have to leave. I mean, we ought to be doing everything we can to get the best and the brightest into our programs and here in the United States when they graduate. Another thing we need to do is make sure that we have the right mix of incentives to get companies to come here. I'm going to mention one in particular. When we reformed the franchise tax, we got rid of the research and development incentive. When the legislature convenes in 2013, the number one priority for Tech America is to reinstitute a research and development sales tax exemption. If you're manufacturing today, all of your materials and equipment for manufacturing are exempt from sales tax. But if you're doing research and development for the product that you will ultimately manufacture, those products are not exempt. It makes no sense. It creates interesting and very difficult problems for those companies who use the same equipment for research that they use for manufacturing. So research and development, it's not a terribly expensive incentive, and it's something that should be, frankly, the highest priority to get companies to make their investments here. I'm going to skip ahead, and I have, if you have an interest in research and development, I can give you some more stats. Finally, we need to leverage the strengths that we have. Our geography is we're positioned perfectly in the United States to access Latin America. I mentioned we have access to relatively low-cost manufacturing in Mexico, and we have, I want to applaud the Secretary of State's office here for their work in recruiting companies to move here from Mexico. I've met recently with several companies who've come here from Monterrey, are creating jobs in the United States, and I think that's great for both countries. The most important thing that we have is the final thing is we are number one. We've got a spirit that is different. When I was in France recently, I was in a shop, and they were selling cookie cutters in the shape of Texas. They didn't have any other state. We are, when I was in Shanghai, you meet people, and they say, where are you from? And I say, Texas. There is a certain pride that we have in being from Texas. We can do whatever we set out to do, and we can be the best. The rest of the country knows it. We just have to prove it, and look forward to working with each of you to get that done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I really appreciate it. Just wondering, we're going to get to Q&A in just a minute. Just didn't know if any of the panelists had any other comments that they wanted to make based on what they've heard today so far. I did have one question I thought I'd throw out to the panel. Here in Texas, we've become well known for what we at the foundation call the Texas model, and other people call it that too. Low taxes, low regulations, less spending, less government, those types of things. We attribute that much to the job creation and economic development going on here in Texas. And on the other side, there's the traditional economic development functions. Siting assistance, special tax credits and abatements, employee training, enterprise funds. Do y'all have a sense? What does Texas need to do in that area? Is there a balance? Do we need to do one side or the other? Is there a balance? Any you want to comment on those thoughts? Guys.
Is there I'll probably just speak loud enough, that's all right. So the answer is don't take away any of the Texas model because that's critical to being here. But on the incentive perspective, I think there is work to be done there. I think things that Jeffrey mentioned around R&D and taxes associated with sales tax and those kind of things, I think continue to be important. Incentives do matter. And if you look at we as a company have hired 700 people in the Bay Area in the last year. Now, I would rather have hired those people here, and frankly, the managers and executives who hired them would rather have hired them here. They weren't here. So, in addition to sort of the incentives matter, we'd like those phone calls, we'd like grants for some of those things. We need the workforce. And so ultimately, the answer is both of those things you talked about are important to us. The most important thing is the workforce.
All right. Any questions from the audience? We've got one. Yeah, go ahead. You're next.
Well, thinking about the STEM workforce, is it necessarily a college-educated workforce, or is there a significant need for industry certifications straight out of high school? What's your, it's probably different based on per company, but what's your balance of college-educated versus career in tech coming out of high school?
Jeffrey probably has the statistics, and I'll let him speak to that in a second. I would say that the answer is you need a college education. Now, that might be a 2-year degree that has a very specific specialty, a focus, and especially from a software perspective. Some kids come out of high school with a great set of skills, and in a couple of years can turn that into something that they can then go get a job and do. The reality, I guess, I'd say in our industry is if all you have is a high school education, then your career will start and end in sales and tech support.
Yeah, I would say the answer is yes. I had a meeting recently with Austin Community College, and what they're focused on is in one portion of their cohort is pushing them forward into the 4-year university. but, and you know a lot of these, you deal with some of the same issues, but the other group is focused on getting a 2-year degree and getting those industry certifications so that they can go into the workforce and maybe in a tech support capacity. But the bottom line, you know, so much of what we're doing, I mentioned how industry or the tech industry has changed everything from medicine. I mean, every aspect of life. Had a meeting recently with the owner of a chain of car repair shops here in Austin. And he said, look, the cars that are coming into my shop are now, they now have batteries, they're hybrids, the vehicles have become basically huge computers with wheels. And his workers, his concern is he can't get the workforce he needs. And so we kind of have to, I think we have to set our thinking to be, regardless of how far a kid can go, we need to be pushing them to get as much STEM as we can get into their heads as they go as far as they possibly can. I mean, we need advanced degrees. We need computer science, engineering, all types of engineering. And I haven't even, I didn't even touch on the health field, but if you talk to the biomedical groups, great opportunities. Texas is well positioned in biomedicine to take advantage of those fields, but we've got to have, again, it's all STEM related. We've got to be pushing kids forward to be ready for those jobs, or they will go elsewhere.
Yes, sir, back there.
As you were talking about the international economy, and it's a global economy, we all know it. The countries where you're going, yes, there's a market. That's why you're there. If there weren't a market, you wouldn't be there. What are you seeing in some of these countries that are making them advantageous? Because they probably can't match us educationally. What is it that makes it advantageous to go there? And does any of that actually apply back to us?
Yeah, so I would say it's interesting that they can't match us educationally. There's one of the challenges that I should say the other way around. An advantage that in particular India and China have is numbers. So there are more honors students in India than there are students in the United States. So even if it's only the very best of the honors students that can do what we need them to do, there's still more of them than there are students in total in the United States. And so, for example, I'll tell you the Chinese government has made a huge STEM push. So much so that one of my employees there spends half the day Saturday with his son in a special math. His son is the top student in the top school. He knows math better than most students would. Saturdays, they go spend extra money to do extra math. And so some of the software programming, engineering, algorithms, they're looking at advanced materials, R&D, that kind of thing. They're putting money into that. And when you do that at the numbers they have, you'll find they'll produce some pretty good results. And frankly, some of those students come here. This very person, he wants his son to get his college education in the United States. Now, given that we don't have enough PhD candidates, and so we need those folks to fill the slots, I'm with Mr. Clarke. I'd just as soon let him stay here then. If we got a brilliant student who wants to come develop ideas, let's let him do it here.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned education.
You mentioned education, and with you 100%, I'm working with a task force at the Austin School District, and two things stand out. One is they are trying to figure out some way to discipline the students without sending them to tickets and all that kind of stuff to the courts. And what really happens is they do not teach teachers how to discipline the classroom and how to make, how to keep all that stuff on a lowest level possible. And so they don't have to refer it out. They don't know how to do that. Don't give them the tools, which is a serious problem. That's one thing to keep your schools in order. If you keep your schools in order, you got discipline in the classroom, you can teach. But the other thing is, half the money that goes into the school district goes into non-classroom stuff. The teachers have got to, they don't get classroom people who stay there and get graduated levels. They put them into the higher education, which I think is a terrible mistake. So when you're doing that, I'm just saying, push education, but have some caveats in there and get some response out of that puts it where it needs to be.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say you're speaking to my personal hot button, which is the money is not getting into the classroom. You look at the numbers, you look at the dollar amounts that are going into education. The money's not making it into the classroom. But there is a desire on the part of school districts not to discipline because they don't want the numbers to show up in their reports of how many kids are going out of the system. And what I see when I talk to kids, and it's kids in the United States, it's kids in kids in Russia, I've met kids in China. Kids want to learn, and what's fascinating is the tougher the economy gets, and they sense it, the more they want to learn. I mean, Chinese kids aren't studying math because they love math. They're studying math because they know it's the key to economic opportunity, and they want to live better than they're living right now. Our kids want to do the same thing, and they will learn if they can learn, and too many of them are in a school where they're not able to learn, and so I thank you for bringing it up again.
Time for a couple more questions. Yes, ma'am, right there.
We moved from California a year ago, and I'd spent 20 years there in technology. I was just thinking about what the environment is here for venture capitalists, for incubators. You know, I was around in the startup period of the 90s in California, and there was much more going on in terms of incubation organizations. It's not just about organizations moving to Austin from other parts of the country and moving parts of their divisions or whatever. It's what can be created here in the environment to create, you know, entrepreneurs and startups. And I don't always see that higher education is the answer, because in the 90s, I was seeing people coming out of junior colleges, coming out of high schools with a passion for technology. And that was what was driving them into starting up businesses, and not necessarily coming out with very high engineering degrees. And some of the most talented people I've hired and worked with didn't come out with high education degrees. So, you know, what can we be doing to create venture capital here, incubation, just incubators who will encourage entrepreneurs and startups? Because I don't think it's just about Silicon Valley looking to have divisions here, but keeping their headquarters in, you know, Northern California.
I would say the chairman mentioned earlier the Emerging Technology Fund, and that's a fund that I think we're looking at over the interim to find out how to make it better. But it finds companies that have great promise, startups that have great promise, and makes a state investment. And what we have found with that program is that state investment has tended to attract follow-on venture capital investment. And we do have incubators. Unfortunately, one of the things that California has done very well is their research universities, their tier 1 universities, the industry clusters have grown up. And that's another hour discussion on how to build those clusters. But exactly what you're talking about is how do we create a cluster around the University of Texas, around Texas A&M, and in biomedicine, or whatever. In Dallas, UT Dallas is heavily focused in the communications fields and telecommunications. How do we grow those clusters? How do we encourage students to commercialize what they're working on and have that cooperative result? And it is something that we're working on. I think that's a great topic for the chairman's committee over the interim. On how do we encourage the incubators and attract some more capital into the state. Certainly Texas is a great place to invest, and frankly, we let you keep a lot more of the money that you make than some other states do.
All right, one last question.
I know that it's not ideal, perhaps, but you keep talking about students. We have a lot of adults who are out of work. Are there any incentives, either through private companies or perhaps through the state, to encourage people to go back to school, to revamp their education? Because technology education 20, 30 years ago is not the same as it is today. So what can we do to create jobs for people who maybe are on a second career?
That's a topic we've actually raised with them. There are retraining dollars out there, and one of the things in the shortage of engineers, we know, I know you got an engineering degree once, and it's really a matter of retraining. And it's something, again, it's a topic we should explore, but it's also one that we've identified because there are engineers who reach a point where, it's particularly in telecommunications, the technology changes, and so we're no longer using that single chip that you were an expert on for 20 years is now irrelevant and considered archaic, and your resume and your skill set are so dated that you can't find new employment, and it's a real waste of a resource if we let those engineers move off into other areas when we've already, in many cases, we've already invested such a huge amount in getting them educated in the first place.
All right. Well,
You guys do.
okay, good. All right. Well, thank you all for being here today, and please join me once again in thanking our panel.